Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the St. Baldrick's Foundation Impact Series, How the Latest Grants Help Treat Kids on Clinical Trials. My name is Kathleen Ruddy. I'm the CEO of the St. Baldrick's Foundation, and I have the best job in the world because every day I get to work with heroes for kids with cancer, 4 of whom you're about to meet. This episode will show the direct impact you have made on the Foundation's latest round of infrastructure grants. Recently, the Foundation awarded more than $819,000 to 17 institutions. These 17 grants enable hospitals to participate more fully in research by supporting a critical role on the research team, that of Clinical Research Associate, or CRA. These are the folks who coordinate clinical trials, and without them, an institution wouldn't be able to open new trials, let alone train the staff and to coordinate patient care and track patient response accurately. These grants are directed to institutions with the highest need, especially where no other St. Baldrick's grants are in progress, and to locations where St. Baldrick's fundraising activity is strong. So these grants are a direct result of the efforts of local volunteers. Today, we'll hear from 2 of the researchers whose institutions have received funds, a childhood cancer survivor who benefited from funding like this, and a corporate volunteer who helped make these grants possible. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first guest, Dr. Juan Carlos Bernini. Dr. Bernini is the medical director at Vannie E. Cook Jr. Children's Cancer and Hematology Clinic in McLean, Texas. He's also a 3-time St. Baldrick's JV, and in the St. Baldrick's League of Legendary Heroes, that makes him a Squire of Hope. Welcome, Dr. Bernini.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your invitation. It's very exciting about what you do, and thank you for your support. Without we had not been able to help so many kids.
Well, tell us more about that, Dr. Bernini. What does a grant like this mean for your patients at Vannie Cook?
Well, it means many, many things, but the most important is to be able to provide the best care available for these children through clinical trials. Our location is very unique. We live in South Texas, the very tip in McAllen. The clinic is located in McAllen, Texas, which is 2-3 miles from the border from Mexico. And through your grant, through your help, we have been able to bring the best care available through clinical trials to these children. Before we open the clinic, before we become a COG member, Children's Oncology Group members, these children usually have very few choices. They either got no treatment, optimal treatment, or those who could have to travel 2-3 hours to get the treatment. Through your help, through your support, through grants, we'll be able to open the clinic and offer these clinical trials to children so we can treat these children here locally without they having to travel, and not only, but once again, offer the best treatment available. I remember before we opened the clinic, there was a very passionate doctor that used to come from San Antonio to provide the care to these children once or twice a month. And I remember literally he used to bring his chemo on the track of his car. Now that we opened the clinic, we can actually offer clinical trials. We have more than 300 patients enrolled in clinical trials, and we have more than 10 clinical trials open right now that we can provide care or offer to these patients here locally.
That's really an impressive number for a smaller institution like yours, and incredible that you've been able to achieve so much in a relatively short period of time, given the fact that a lot of the philanthropic, there are philanthropic constraints in your areas. Is that not true?
Absolutely, yeah. And our clinic is a non-for-profit. It's a joint venture between Baylor, Texas Children's, and a local foundation. But most of our resources come from donations, from grants like from St. Baldrick, and yes, is challenging, but so far we have never said no to any patients, and we have been able to treat every single patient that crosses the door, which is a great satisfaction. Nowadays, it's very difficult because insurance and costs, but due to our unique situation, we have never said no to any patient, regardless whether they have documented or undocumented, they have money, they don't have, they have insurance. We have always treated our patients. And that made me proud of it. Sorry.
No, it's interesting, and impressive again that you've been able to do that. I know that we have a great team of St. Baldrick's volunteers there in McAllen who've raised over $331,000 for research, and that has come back to your institution. But I also think that the comfort for a family of facing a childhood cancer diagnosis and knowing that they can stay in their home with their own community and they don't have to travel far for treatment is a great comfort because it allows their support system to be around them too at such a time.
Absolutely, and it's so important for that. These families are already struggling. They have, the devastating news of having a loved one, a child with cancer, and then in the old days, before our clinic was open or available, the treatment to them, they have to travel basically or don't get treatment. So it makes a big difference. And one of my key points when I talk to them and given the diagnosis and the treatment, I make sure that I make emphasis that the treatment they're going to receive here in McAllen is exactly the same treatment that they would receive in Houston, Washington, Miami, wherever they were, because of these grants allowing us to offer clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an incredible program, and I know that your team has been so diligent, and I thank you for joining us today to help share this important information with our audience, and keep up the great work in McAllen, Dr. Bernini.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, and once again, you're doing wonderful, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next guest is Dr. Tom McLean. Dr. McLean is a pediatric hematologist and oncologist at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He is an 11-time St. Baldrick's JV and a Knight Commander in our lexicon of heroes. So welcome, Dr. McLean.
Thank you, Kathleen, for inviting me to join this live stream today. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. Tell us, Dr. McLean, why are clinical trials so important for pediatric cancer patients?
Right. Thank you for that question. Clinical trials are a crucial part of how we advance cancer cures, really. It is research, and you can think of research as kind of in two big pots. There are lots of different types of research, but one big pot you can think of is basic science research. That happens in the lab, and I'm sure we've all seen pictures of scientists in the lab with test tubes and things like that. And then the other big pot of research is clinical research. And clinical research is where we actually take those new discoveries made in the lab and test them and try them out in patients and people to see if it really works, to see if it really helps them. And both types of research are important, basic science and clinical research, and they both take teamwork, and they both depend on the other for success. Now, some folks might think of research as, or clinical trials as a big risk or being treated like a guinea pig or something like that. We get that reaction commonly, but I can assure you that neither is the case. They're not super risky, and in no way do we treat patients like guinea pigs. We have a lot of safeguards in place to protect the rights of patients, including the right to come off of a clinical trial at any time for any reason. Some trials use placebos, like for, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the COVID vaccines that are being developed, and some of those trials use placebos to see if the vaccine actually works or not. But in cancer, we never use placebos. We always are upfront and tell the patients exactly what they'll be getting. Now, clinical trials are voluntary, and they do have potential risks, but they also have potential benefits. They're not for everyone, but I would encourage your viewers today, if you're listening to this or watching this live stream, that if you have cancer or have a loved one with cancer, I would encourage you to talk to to the patient's doctor to ask about the possibility of enrolling on a clinical trial. Clinical trials, in my opinion, offer the most cutting edge sort of current therapy that we have. And again, they're not for everyone, but after considering the risks and benefits, you might think about enrolling on a clinical trial. And for children with cancer, the vast majority of clinical trials in North America are developed and run by the Children's Oncology Group, or COG, with which, of course, St. Baldrick's has a close and great relationship. And the COG is a consortium of pediatric cancer centers across the United States and Canada, as well as some countries in other parts of the world. And that's how we conduct our research, our clinical research here at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem.
So my understanding is that historically, kids are predominantly treated on clinical trials. provided the parents opt in and agree to do it, but that it's much more rare in adults. Is that still the case? Is it changing? Is there a greater need for philanthropic support for clinical trials today?
Yes, Kathleen, that is still the case for probably many reasons, some of which we may not even understand. We do enroll many more children with cancer onto clinical trials than our adult counterparts. And we don't really know why, but one thing we know for sure is that clinical trials take a lot of work and a lot of behind the scenes work. And that's what these infrastructure grants why they're so important, because these data manager or clinical research associates that the infrastructure grants fund do all the work behind the scenes to help make sure that we are doing the research right, that it's ethical, that we're following the rules, that it's past all the committees and appropriate protocols that need to go through, and that we submit the data accurately and so that we can get meaningful and sound results in the end. So in the end, to answer your question, yes, there's such a need for ongoing support and philanthropy to support this type of research. You know, when I was born in the 1960s, if you were a child with cancer, your chance of being cured was terrible, probably 10, maybe 20% at best. Today, it's just the opposite. Today, we cure 4 out of 5 kids with cancer, about 80%. And it's through research and through clinical trials that we've been able to, the basic science research and then clinical trials, been able to make that advancement. And 80% is great, but it's not 100%. And we're not going to stop until we get to 100%.
Nor will St. Baldrick's. We are in this for the long haul. I tell people all the time, this is, unfortunately, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But we want to make sure that we're not doing damage to kids at the time that we're trying to save them. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen in a lot of the research is that the treatment can be quite harsh at times. And so part of your work and part of these clinical trials is to ensure that the treatments become more humane and less toxic and leave kids with less scars, if you will, from their treatment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is one of the downsides of cancer treatment, is that it's still pretty harsh. It's great to be able to cure these patients, of course, but sometimes they are left with long-term side effects, and we like to follow them for years and years. And as we follow them and learn more, we can then revise the treatment protocols that we're using now so that we can minimize some of those long-term side effects.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. Well, your team there at the institution, obviously you are fighting for kids every single day. All of your work and every breathing moment revolves around that. But since 2007, your institution has had an event and you've participated. Your nurses and your staff have shaved with you, and you've raised almost $670,000 for grants like this. And so we're proud to have that partnership with you. But why is it that your team decided to go the extra mile and get involved in this way also?
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We love our event and our local supporters, and for the St. Baldrick's team that puts it on, you guys really have raised the money. We just are happy to participate. But, for those of you who don't know, people raise money by volunteering to have their head shaved, and they go to family and friends and ask for donations. Hey, I'm getting my head shaved for St. Baldrick's. Would you be willing to donate for pediatric oncology research? And I'm always humbled by how generous folks are. And we always have a team from the hospital, as you mentioned, doctors and nurses and CRAs and others. And it's by far the highlight of our event. And we always have our patients come up on the stage to help, shave our heads. We give them all this chemotherapy that makes them bald. So they get to, on this day, extract a little bit of revenge, if you will, by making us bald. And, they're typically our tears of joy and happiness. And usually people open up their wallets literally and give money. And I'm so humbled by that. So this year we had an event, pandemic-friendly event, where we only could have one patient come, but she was there and it was great. And we hope by next year we'll have a vaccine available and it'll be safer and we can have more patients back up on stage with us.
We all are hoping for that, and for so many reasons. And I welcome you to come back and to bring all of the kids. And hopefully, there'll be lots and lots of heads to shave, and they'll be able to to turn the tables on all of us. I think one of the interesting things about these events is that we all get the opportunity to experience that aspect of living as kids with cancer do, without hair. And I know that so many kids have told me how much it means to them. So thank you to you and for being with us today, for sharing those great insights, and to your team for participating as well.
Thank you, Kathleen, to you and all your St. Baldrick's teammates and your supporters and donors from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you just joining us, we're talking about how your support of St. Baldrick's infrastructure grants helps children with cancer. Now I'd like to welcome Sarah Swaim Rostock. Sarah is 31 years old, a 2-time survivor of childhood leukemia, and a stem cell transplant thriver. She loves giving back. She volunteers her time as a mentor and counselor at Special Loves Camps for Children with Cancer. She served as a St. Baldrick's National Ambassador in 2010. She's a guest blogger for us. She's the co-organizer of St. Baldrick's event in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And she's a 17-year volunteer in Shavy. She's personally raised more than $30,000 for childhood cancer research and has thus distinguished herself as a St. Baldrick's Crusader for a Cure. And surely she does. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to talk about my favorite topic, St. Baldrick's Foundation.
Well, Sarah, you are here to represent why we are all doing what we do, why Doctors Bernini and McLean are working so hard every day to improve treatment, why our next guest is in the fight trying to lead his company and their colleagues and clients and vendors to support kids like you. Well, now that you're an adult, but you live this every day. And I know that you have firsthand experience with the clinical trial process. Why do you believe they're so important? And what role did St. Baldrick's supporters play in your treatment?
So clinical trials to me are so important because when I was originally diagnosed in 2003 with a rare form of childhood leukemia, I was on a protocol that was about 40 years old. And that protocol, unfortunately, had really bad side effects, does damage your vital organs. And I was very lucky to walk away from my 3 years of treatment, with minimal damage to my heart and lungs. Fast forward 6.5 years later, I relapsed with that same childhood leukemia. And my doctors flat out told me that if I were to receive the same protocol that I received in 2003, I would go into my transplant, which was inevitable, not whole. I would go into it with pretty significant heart damage and pretty significant lung damage. However, thankfully, in 2010, when I relapsed, my home hospital, Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Norfolk, Virginia, received an infrastructure grant from the St. Baldrick's Foundation. And that allowed me to take part in a clinical trial for a drug called clofarabine. And that was such a big deal because it was the first drug developed to treat my type of cancer in a very long time. And it essentially saved my heart and my lungs from the irreparable damage that would have occurred if I was on my original protocol, which allowed me to go into my transplant as whole as possible and as strong as possible. And your second part of the question, our volunteers, our Shavies, our donors, we have a huge event that has been years in the making. We raise about $100,000 a year. And it is because of that support locally that CHKD my hospital is considered for an infrastructure grant from the St. Baldrick's Foundation. So everything is directly linked. and I cannot express how thankful I am to the St. Baldrick's Foundation for all that they do, for awareness, for funding. Just, I can't even express it. It's so important. And therefore, our support the support of our event is also so important.
Well, it's incredible. I'm humbled every day, Sarah, because it's because of the generosity of volunteers and donors who make all this possible. I like to think of my colleagues at the foundation. We have a small staff, and our job is to recruit and equip all of you out there to be the heroes for kids. And when you look at the fact that we've got 50,000 active volunteers in a year's time and 2 million donors, you can see where the heavy lifting is getting done. It's in the volunteers. And I think many take it on faith that what they're doing matters, but you are a living example. You are living proof that clinical trials work, that investing in this kind of research saves lives. I think some other survivors as well who are here today because of clinical trials and the efforts of St. Baldrick's volunteers. Would you like to share any of those with us?
Sure. Well, first, I was just thinking about this right before you said it. Fundraising sometimes can be pretty abstract. It's not often that you see the effect, right away. And especially with St. Baldrick's, when I was fundraising after I was diagnosed, we know that it's important and that it's doing important things, but sometimes not having a personal attachment to it can be a little not connecting, I guess. So, it never occurred to me that I would directly benefit from the dollars that I raised with the St. Baldrick's Foundation, and I did. So again, those dollars that you're raising at events directly impacts patients. Trying to think of my wonderful friends that I know that have received that have been on clinical trials. But so do you have someone specific in mind?
Well, I was thinking about Abby, and who is an amazing, and she's right there with you. Tell us about Abby.
Right there with me. Abby Furco is one of my best friends, and she is 13 now. And I actually met her at the camp that I volunteer with. And when she relapsed, I reached out to her mom and just said, hey, I'm happy to be a help, answer questions as honestly as possible. I do have a background in early childhood, so I was like, I'm happy to explain things plainly and prepare her for what she has coming. And that just sparked a beautiful relationship. And, she is a true miracle child. And gosh, I could go on for hours about her. And she's so strong.
She's an inspirational young lady, and we're all so privileged to know and root for Abby every day.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that relationship as you were speaking, and it's interesting to me that you were a little bit older when you relapsed, and you had a different kind of perspective. You had access to different information. The average age of a child at the point of diagnosis with cancer is 6. And so what they understand about what has to be done to them and what they have to go through, we use kind of sanitized words, if you will, to describe these treatments, but they're pretty brutal. And, your role in helping a younger patient understand why and how they will be treated and is really touching. But I think for you personally, it probably means a lot that so many volunteers are behind all of these young patients. What kind of hope do you think that gives to other patients in the fight?
Support, it's funny. When you're diagnosed, it could be very lacking, especially if you're in an environment where you don't have a lot of family support. You don't have someone who can stay with you in the hospital full time. There are so many patients that live that life. And I am very blessed and lucky that was not the case for me. But I think that, when I see the children at our event shaving the doctors' heads, seeing complete strangers care for what is happening to them, I think that is, I know for me, when I was going through treatment, when I was in middle school and high school, it's so overwhelming and it's so touching. And it kind of gives you a boost. It makes you think, I've got all these people behind me and I can do anything. And it kind of gives you the energy to keep going, you know?
Well, Sarah, you just gave me goosebumps, and I suspect that some of our viewers have them too. If so, you can read many of Sarah's blogs on our website. Please check them out. And thank you, Sarah, so much for being here today and for sharing your unique perspective with all of us.
Oh, anytime. Thank you guys so much for including me in things, and I do not misspeak when I say that the St. Baldrick's Foundation is my favorite topic to talk about. So anytime, and I hope that that this just sparks so much more for the St. Baldrick's Foundation.
Thank you, Sarah. Our final guest today is George Ballentoni. George is manager of global accounts for BMC Software, as well as the lead volunteer organizer for BMC Care's St. Baldrick's Head Shaving event. He is a 13-year volunteer and a night commander of St. Baldrick's. George, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me on, and I am humbled. Wow, those stories that we just heard were fantastic. Thank you.
They are. Well, you have a fantastic story too. You're very passionate about St. Baldrick's mission, but tell us, why did you work so hard to get St. Baldrick's adopted as one of BMC's philanthropic pillars?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I've been involved, as you said, 13 years. And in my previous company, NetApp, we worked really well with you guys. And when I came to BMC, I was like, hey, I'm part of this give back, this charity. And in BMC's culture and in their leadership, they just grasped it and they thought it was great and they've backed it. And, and really that has changed the way we get the momentum done and really helps us and helps you carry the message forward. So, it is what everybody has described. The reason we do it is really the quality of life, right? Everybody's impacted with it, but what you guys are focusing on is not just about curing it, but adding the quality of life. And that is the game changer.
This year, I think there were some flies in the ointment, right? The pandemic caused you to have to make a big pivot from an in-person experience to a virtual event. Tell us about the success you had in doing that. Yeah.
That it was definitely, everything was up in the air. So we'll start now, it's December. We'll actually start planning our events for the year, right? And we'll usually do them around March, April-ish timeframe. And we kind of had them all teed up, and then we went into lockdown. And as we went into lockdown, we realized, wow, this is going to have a really big impact. And we paused, just like everybody did. And then working with your team, and your team made it very easy for us. And we had lots of conversations doing an event just like this to go virtual. And we're like, wow, that's really interesting. And when we went virtual, we actually grew. We had more people join. We raised more funds than ever. And what I really enjoyed about the virtual, and I've done many events, many being on the stage doing stuff, was you got to look inside everybody's family. Right? Because what changed here was not George with a clipper doing a colleague's, it was a spouse, a child, a friend. And it was really amazing to see all this happen. You were part of our event, so thank you very much. We had 80 plus people on there, from one company across the globe. We had to hold it during the middle of the day because we had people from all parts of the globe on, and we also had it carry over to a second event. That event just raised so much awareness that we actually held a second virtual event afterwards, and those were amazing. And the stories that came afterwards were, I had a gentleman that I work with. He was telling me that his son saw him do it. His son is 5. want to understand it. And then his son shaved his head the next day to stand in solidarity. So those are the things that really, when you thought like, hey, this door really closed, a window truly opened, and it was amazing. And it is amazing.
That's incredible. What you're speaking to is really the ultimate mission of St. Baldrick's. It's to keep those families intact, right? And making sure that they always have opportunities to come together. And I think in this era, we've all had a new opportunity to kind of revalue and reprioritize our family. And I think for all of us, it's very poignant to think about the isolation that kids with cancer are forced to live with, and being separated from so many people, their friends, school, et cetera. And we're all getting a little taste of that. And so it sounds like for BMC, you all got to come together in a unique way, celebrating your families. And I think that's beautiful, what you shared.
It is, and it really is. It speaks to BMC's culture, right? We've put the idea out there, and it does what BMC does well, right? It just gains the momentum, and the BMC family took it on and believes in the cause, right? St. Baldrick's is a big cause for us. People know it by name. They know why we're involved in it, right? And what you do, and really, we realize, and I think Sarah said it best, right? You don't really get to see the effort that you guys put in. We do the kind of what I'll say the front part, and just to see how you guys really go about doing the grants and really focusing on the back end makes it that much more enjoyable and that much easier for us to do it. And so each year we continue to grow. And as you said, last year you thought would be a year that you would probably shrink a little. We actually grew even more, and probably had some of the best I've ever seen in my 13 years.
So what advice would you give executives at other companies who are thinking about employee engagement and team building activities like this?
Yeah, that's great. I would say you have to start, right? And start simply. Don't think that it's going to come in the first year, right? It's a group of people with passion, and that passion is going to catch fire, and you just got to keep nurturing it and enjoying it. And I would say that you need to start, find out what works for you and your company. One of the things that we added in BMC, as you know, Brave the Shave, or part of that's a big part of St. Baldrick's, but we've added Wear Green Hair, right? And we've been able to actually double our volunteers, and we probably raise 40% of our funds comes from people wearing green hair. Some people put them in, some people might wear a wig, some people might put them in their hair and go to meetings with them. And then when they go to those meetings, those questions are asked, hey, why do you have that in there? And they get to tell the story. So yes, and we also look for new ways to add stuff. Maybe riding a bike or going for a run will be something we add this year going forward. But I would say for companies interested, you got to start simply and then find out what works inside your company.
That's a great idea to help all of us lose that COVID-15, right? So I love that idea. Well, George, I want to thank you for your personal leadership and the corporate partnership you've built for St. Baldrick's with BMC. I want to thank all of our esteemed guests for sharing their time today, as well as all of you viewing. Stay tuned for the next episode in our Impact series, which is coming soon. And if you'd like to learn more about the important work of the St. Baldrick's Foundation and its volunteers and how you can participate, please see the information below. And for now, thanks for helping give kids a lifetime.